Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're looking into a story that almost feels like it's ripped from the headlines of a political thriller,
Yeah?
Elon Musk, Nigel Farage, and a potential power shift in British politics.
Right.
We've got a whole stack of news articles, social media buzz, and expert analysis, and they're all kind of pointing towards this development that could really seriously shake things up.
It's fascinating, this situation. It really speaks to a lot of the anxieties that people have about, you know, wealth and tech and democracy all colliding in a way.
Yeah, could the world's richest man actually sway a British election?
It's a question.
I mean, that's what we're going to try to unpack today.
Yeah, that's what we're going to be looking at.
So let's get into it. This story really starts with a meeting. It's almost like a scene straight out of a movie.
Uh-huh.
Elon Musk, Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK, and their treasurer, Nick Candy, all hanging out at Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago club. And of course, just to add to that visual, Farage posts a picture on X, formerly Twitter, of the three of them standing in front of a portrait of Trump.
Of course.
So they're really setting the scene here.
Yeah, quite the visual. Isn't it almost a very deliberate signal of the kind of political disruption that they may be aiming for,
Totally.
But, beyond just the optics, this meeting has really sparked a lot of speculation about Musk potentially backing Reform UK,
Yeah,
which is a party that is often compared to Trump's movement here in the U.S.
exactly. And the rumor mill is absolutely churning with this potential donation. Some sources are saying it could be anywhere from $20 million to $100 million.
$100 million.
To put that in perspective,
Oh, yeah.
the biggest political donation in British history was about £10 million. So we're talking about a completely different scale here.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's important to remember that initial figure, the $100 million figure that was kind of floating around, was initially associated with his potential spending in the U.S., which is obviously a vastly different political landscape than the UK. But even if the donation to Reform UK is significantly smaller, it would still dwarf anything that we've ever seen before in British politics.
Right.
And that's obviously something that has a lot of people concerned.
Makes sense. So this obviously raises a lot of questions. Like, first off,
Sure.
can Musk, a U.S. citizen, even legally put money into a British political party?
Right. That's a really crucial point.
Right.
And actually, it exposes kind of a potential weakness in the system.
Yeah.
As it stands right now, UK rules do forbid, foreigners from directly funding political parties.
Yeah.
However, there are, loopholes like funneling money through UK-registered companies. And guess what?
Oh, I bet I know where this is going.
Musk has both Tesla and X operating in the UK.
Yeah, so theoretically, he could just sidestep the rules. I mean, he's Elon Musk. He probably has lawyers who could navigate a black hole.
Probably right.
So, but even if he can, why would he?
Here's a question.
What is motivating him to back Farage and Reform UK?
Yeah. To understand that, I think we really need to take a look at Musk's own political pronouncements.
Okay.
Because he hasn't exactly been shy about expressing his, distaste for the current UK government.
Yeah, he's been pretty vocal about that.
He's slammed the Online Safety Act, which aims to regulate online content.
Right, which would obviously affect his business with X.
Directly.
Yeah.
He's criticized inheritance tax policies, called him crazy, and he's even, voiced some strong opinions about how the government handled those summer riots.
So, okay, he's got beef with the government. We get it. But he's gone a little bit further than that, hasn't he?
He has.
He said some pretty provocative stuff about the state of the UK as a whole.
And this is where I think the potential connection with Reform UK gets really interesting. Because Musk has used some pretty dramatic language, claiming that the UK is going full Stalin.
Whoa.
And even predicting inevitable civil war.
Those are pretty strong words.
They are, and these pronouncements, while shocking to some, actually do resonate with a certain segment of voters who are feeling, disillusioned with the establishment and fearful of government overreach.
Yeah, and that's what Reform UK has really been tapping into, right?
That's right.
This idea of limited government and what they call common sense policies.
Exactly. So, Musk's rhetoric, while extreme to some, actually does align with some of the fears and frustrations.
So he's not just throwing money at the problem, he's also kind of adding fuel to the fire with these statements.
It certainly raises questions about his motives. While he presents himself as this defender of free speech, His critics argue that, his actions often benefit a very specific ideology, often aligning with, right-wing populism.
Okay, so that's led to accusations of hypocrisy then.
It ha-
Especially considering his criticism of labor, he's called them a tyrannical police state.
So wait, hold on. He's accusing labor of being tyrannical
Hmm.
while at the same time trying to influence the election with this massive donation.
Right.
The irony is not lost on me.
The irony is not lost on a lot of people, and it really throws a spotlight on this fundamental question of, how much influence should wealth have in a democracy?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is a huge question, and it's something that, we're going to be discussing today.
If a single person can potentially change the outcome of an election with a donation,
Right.
what does that say about the fairness of the system?
What does that say about the average voter?
Yeah, it feels like we're entering some ethically murky waters here. But before we go full conspiracy theory,
Okay.
let's kind of reel it back in and talk about the potential impact on this upcoming election.
Yeah.
If this money does, in fact, go from Musk to Reform UK, what are we talking about here? What kind of advantage would they have?
Well, a donation of that scale could be an absolute game changer.
Imagine the kind of campaign that Reform UK could run.
Yeah.
You know, blanket advertising, sophisticated online targeting, rallies that feel more like rock concerts, all aimed at, reaching voters that might never even glance at their platform otherwise.
It wouldn't just level the playing field. It would tilt it completely in their favor.
It really would. It's true. And we also know that Musk is a master of social media.
Yeah, he practically lives online.
He does.
So to have him in your corner with that massive reach on X, it's almost like having a personal propaganda machine.
Absolutely. And Tim Montgomery, who's a political commentator,
Yeah.
who recently actually switched from the Conservatives to Reform UK,
Okay.
he's hinted that Musk actually sees this as an experiment of sorts.
What does that mean?
Can tech in social media fundamentally change the political landscape?
So the UK is his political petri dish.
That's a good way to put it. It's exciting and terrifying at the same time.
It is a little bit of both.
But what about the other parties,
Yeah, how are they reacting to this?
They're definitely scrambling. There's been a renewed push for campaign finance reform,
Okay.
with some advocating for these strict caps on individual and corporate donations. The argument is that this would level the playing field.
That makes sense.
Right.
You got to have rules if you want a fair fight.
In theory, yes, but it's not that simple. There's pushback even within labor.
Oh, really?
Yeah, some of their big donors are not exactly thrilled about the idea of limiting, individual contributions.
Oh, of course not.
It gets messy quickly because, where do you draw the line?
Yeah.
How much is too much?
It's a very complex issue.
It really is.
And it's interesting how this whole Musk donation has really kind of exposed these cracks in the system.
Oh, absolutely.
Like he's shining a giant spotlight on this whole business of money and politics.
It forces us to really confront this question of, if someone can essentially buy their way into influencing an election, is that really democratic?
Right. Where does the power actually lie?
Exactly. And it's a debate that's playing out not just in the UK, but globally. As wealth inequality grows and technology gives individuals unprecedented reach and power.
So we've talked about a lot of the negatives here.
Sure.
Unfair advantage, the potential for erosion of trust, the whole money in politics problem. But let's play devil's advocate for a second.
Okay.
Are there any potential benefits to having someone like Musk, with his disruptive energy, shake things up a little bit?
It's an interesting thought.
Yeah.
He certainly isn't afraid to challenge the status quo.
That's true. And maybe his involvement could inject some fresh ideas into the system, new ways of thinking about politics.
That are less bogged down by tradition and maybe more focused on, tech-driven solutions.
I mean, this is the guy who wants to colonize Mars, so thinking outside the box is definitely his thing.
Exactly. And, he might be able to connect with those younger voters who are just completely turned off by traditional politics.
I could see that.
He's got that whole tech-savvy futurist vibe that might resonate with a generation that's, used to rapid change and innovation.
Yeah, it's like if your politics feels stale and out of touch, maybe someone like Musk feels a bit more relatable, even if his ideas seem a little bit out there sometimes.
It's a point worth considering, however.
Yeah.
I think even with these potential upsides, it's crucial to remember that we're talking about a foreign billionaire trying to influence another country's election.
It does feel a little bit like overstepping.
It raises serious questions about national sovereignty and democratic processes.
Yeah, shouldn't the people of the UK be the ones deciding their own future?
Exactly.
Without a billionaire meddling from the sidelines.
And that brings us to, I think, the crux of this whole situation. How do we balance individual freedom and wealth with the integrity of democratic institutions?
It's a dilemma that's playing out in real time,
It is.
and the outcome could have some really lasting consequences.
For how we view democracy in the digital age.
Okay, so we've gone pretty deep on the Musk-Farage connection.
We have.
The potential donation, the political and ethical implications, and even explored some of the potential benefits, or at least the potential upsides, however controversial they may be. But there's one more layer to this onion I think we need to peel back.
Sure.
What do Musk's views actually mean for the UK?
Let's take a closer look.
Okay.
Musk really frames himself as this champion of free speech, railing against what he sees as censorship on social media.
Right, and that's a big part of Reform UK's platform as well, right?
It is absolutely a key part of their platform as well.
They want to protect free speech from government overreach. But here's where I think it gets a little bit tricky. What does free speech actually mean in this context?
That's the question, isn't it?
Because everyone agrees with free speech in principle, but then, things get a little bit messy when you start talking about specifics.
Right. Where do you draw the line?
Yeah, exactly. Musk's critics argue that, his actions on X, like reinstating previously banned accounts, it seems less about protecting free speech and more about amplifying voices that just align with his own personal views.
Yeah, and those views at times have veered into some pretty inflammatory territory.
He's called the UK full Stalin and predicted civil war.
It's intense.
That's a little intense.
But while Musk's pronouncements might seem extreme, they do tap into a very real sense of anxiety among some voters who feel that the government's becoming too intrusive, that, traditional values are being eroded, and that their way of life is under threat.
So it's not just about the money he might be giving to Reform UK. It's also about the ideas that he's amplifying.
Exactly.
Ideas that resonate with a certain segment of the population that feel ignored by the establishment.
That's right.
That's a pretty potent combination, wealth and influence amplified by a social media platform that can spread those ideas at lightning speed.
It can, and that's where I think it gets really unsettling. Because it's not just about one election. It's about this broader trend of wealthy individuals using their resources to shape political discourse.
Yeah, and potentially influence outcomes.
On a global scale.
It's a new kind of power dynamic that's emerging, and we're all still trying to figure out how to navigate it.
This situation really does raise some fundamental questions about the role of wealth and technology in a democracy.
Yeah.
Can a system built on the principle of one person, one vote withstand the pressure of this kind of concentrated wealth?
Yeah.
And the ability to manipulate information flows online.
These are definitely challenges that every democracy is grappling with right now.
They are, it's true.
But I think it's important to remind ourselves that democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires active participation, critical thinking, and a willingness to engage in these difficult conversations.
Absolutely. And I think, this particular situation, as unsettling as it might be, offers us this really valuable opportunity for reflection.
Okay.
What do we want from our democracies? What are the guardrails that we need to put in place to ensure that they remain resilient in the face of these new challenges?
These are definitely questions that we should all be asking ourselves, not just in the UK, but wherever we live. Because the future of democracy really depends on an informed and engaged citizenry who are willing to stand up for the values that underpin a free and just society.
Well said.
All right, so let's shift gears for a moment and delve into some potential scenarios here.
Okay.
What happens if Musk's backing does propel Reform UK to victory? What might that look like for the UK? And could it set a precedent for other countries? That's a question that could keep us up all night.
Yeah.
So let's dive in.
Let's do it. Okay, so imagine Reform UK fueled by Musk's money, with his online megaphone.
Right.
They managed to secure a significant number of seats in Parliament.
Okay.
They wouldn't necessarily need to win outright to exert considerable influence.
Right.
Even as a powerful minority party,
Yeah.
they could disrupt the political landscape
Yeah.
and really force their agenda onto the national stage.
So that would be a major shakeup. But what would their agenda actually look like in practice? I mean, we've talked about the broad strokes, limited government, free speech, a focus on what they call common sense policies.
Right.
But what does that actually translate into when it comes to actual policies?
It's difficult to say for certain because their platform is still kind of evolving.
Okay.
However, we can glean some insights from their rhetoric and the policies that they've already proposed. They've called for drastic cuts to taxes and government spending,
Okay.
a tough stance on immigration, and a rollback of regulations. particularly in areas like environmental protection and online content moderation.
So imagine a UK with significantly lower taxes, fewer regulations, and a stricter approach to immigration. That sounds like a pretty radical departure from the current status quo.
It would definitely represent a significant shift to the right,
Yeah.
potentially aligning the UK more closely with the policies of countries like
Mhm.
the United States under Donald Trump.
And that kind of brings us back to the bigger picture. If this experiment, because let's face it, that's what it is, if it works in the UK, could it embolden other wealthy individuals to try to do the same thing in their own countries? I mean, we're talking about a whole new level of political interference here,
It's true.
potentially reshaping democracies around the world.
It's a possibility that we can't ignore. If Musk's involvement proves to be a successful blueprint, we might see a wave of, billionaire-backed political movements,
Yeah.
each pushing their own agendas and potentially destabilizing political systems that are already under strain.
That's a pretty sobering thought. It feels like we're at a crossroads, not just in the UK, but globally.
Yeah.
How do we protect the integrity of our democracies from undue influence,
Yeah.
whether it comes from foreign powers, massive corporations, or in this case, a single individual with extraordinary wealth and a global platform?
These are the questions that need to be,
Yeah.
at the forefront of the public debate right now.
Yeah.
We need to really examine campaign finance laws, consider regulations on social media platforms, and perhaps most importantly, cultivate a citizenry that is informed,
Yeah.
engaged, and willing to hold those in power accountable.
So that's where you, the listener, come in.
Exactly.
Don't let this just be another headline that you scroll by in your feed. Think critically about the information that you're consuming, ask the tough questions, and engage in those constructive conversations with your friends, family, and community.
Because the future of democracy rests on the shoulders of all of us. It's up to each of us to be vigilant, to demand transparency, and to ensure that our voices are heard.
Okay, so we've gone pretty deep here.
We have.
We've gone from this meeting at Mar-a-Lago to exploring the complex interplay of wealth technology and the future of democracy. It's a lot to process, and we encourage you to keep exploring these issues on your own.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope you found it insightful, and we really encourage you to stay curious, stay engaged, and stay informed.
Okay, so Musk's backing leads Reform UK to victory. What does that look like? What does that actually mean for the UK?
Okay, so imagine a scenario
Yeah.
where Reform UK, fueled by Musk's money,
Right.
amplified by his online megaphone, they managed to secure a significant number of seats in Parliament. Now, they wouldn't necessarily need to win outright to exert considerable influence.
Right.
Even as a powerful minority party, they could really disrupt the political landscape
Right.
and force their agenda onto the national stage.
So that would be a major shakeup. But what might their agenda actually look like in practice? I mean, we've talked about their, broad strokes, limited government free speech, a focus on what they call common sense policies.
Right.
But how would that translate into actual policies?
It's difficult to say for certain as Reform UK's platform is still evolving.
Okay.
However, we can glean some insights from their rhetoric
Oh.
and the policies they've already proposed. They've called for drastic cuts to taxes and government spending, a tough stance on immigration, and a rollback of regulations, particularly in areas like environmental protection and online content moderation.
So imagine a UK with significantly lower taxes, fewer regulations, and a more restrictive approach to immigration. That sounds like a pretty radical departure from the current status quo.
It would certainly represent a significant shift to the right, potentially aligning the UK more closely with the policies of countries like the United States under Donald Trump.
And that brings us back to the bigger picture.
It does.
If this experiment, because let's face it, that's what it is. If this experiment works in the UK, could it embolden other wealthy individuals to try the same thing in their own countries?
It's a possibility we can't ignore.
I mean, we're talking about a whole new level of political interference,
It's true.
potentially reshaping democracies around the world.
If Musk's involvement proves to be a successful blueprint, we might see a wave of billionaire-backed political movements, each pushing their own agendas and potentially destabilizing political systems that are already under strain.
It's a sobering thought. It feels like we're at a crossroads, not just in the UK, but globally.
Yeah.
How do we protect the integrity of our democracies from undue influence, whether it comes from foreign powers, massive corporations, or, in this case, a single individual with extraordinary wealth and a global platform?
These are the questions that need to be at the forefront of public debate right now. We need to examine campaign finance laws, consider regulations on social media platforms, And perhaps most importantly, cultivate a citizenry that's informed, engaged, and willing to hold those in power accountable.
And that's where you, the listener, come in.
Exactly.
Don't let this story be just another headline that scrolls by on your feed. Think critically about the information you're consuming. Ask the tough questions and engage in constructive conversations with your friends, family, and community.
Because the future of democracy rests on the shoulders of us all. It's up to each of us to be vigilant, to demand transparency, and to ensure that our voices are heard.
This has been quite a deep dive.
Yeah,
We've gone from a meeting at Mar-a-Lago to exploring some pretty heady stuff. The potential for a political shakeup in the UK, the role of social media in shaping political discourse, and the broader challenges facing democracies in the digital age.
It's a story that's still unfolding, and one that we need to pay close attention to. The outcome of this situation in the UK could have ripple effects across the globe, impacting how we view wealth, power, and the future of democracy itself.
Big stuff for sure. So as we sign off, we want to leave you with this thought. Don't be a bystander. Be an active participant in shaping the world you want to see. Ask the tough questions, engage in constructive dialogue, and never underestimate the power of your voice.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. I hope it sparked some thoughtful conversations and inspired you to stay informed and engaged.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.
So Reform UK, they've got Musk's backing millions of dollars potentially, and that online megaphone.
Right, that we talked about.
They get a foothold in Parliament. What happens next?
Do they bulldoze their way through with this radical agenda?
Not necessarily. British politics is complex.
Yeah.
With these long-standing traditions and institutions that really tend to resist rapid change.
Okay.
So even with a strong showing, Reform UK would likely face a lot of pushback from within Parliament itself.
Right, so it's not an instant revolution, more like a long and messy battle.
Exactly, and even without, a complete overhaul, their presence could still shift that political center of gravity.
How so?
Well, imagine the pressure that they could exert on the Conservative Party, pushing them further to the right on issues like immigration taxes, social spending.
It's kind of like that saying, a rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah.
But in this case, it might be more like a rising tide of populism, shifting the whole political landscape to the right.
A very apt analogy. And that shift, could have really profound consequences for the UK's relationship with the rest of the world. Well, imagine a UK that's less aligned with the European Union, more isolationist in its trade policies.
Yeah.
And potentially, more aligned with the nationalistic rhetoric that we've seen in other countries.
Yeah, that paints a pretty dramatic picture. And it's not just about policies, right?
Right.
We've talked about Musk's influence on social media. What happens if that same approach, amplifying certain voices, pushing certain narratives, that becomes a dominant force in UK politics?
That's where the potential for disruption and even danger becomes very real.
Okay.
Because social media, while it is powerful, is also incredibly vulnerable to manipulation.
We've seen that.
We've already seen how it can be used to spread misinformation, stoke divisions, erode trust in institutions.
Right.
And if those tactics become normalized in political discourse, it could really undermine the very foundations of a healthy democracy.
It's almost like we're talking about a weaponization of social media for political gain.
Yeah.
And if it works in the UK, who's to say it won't be replicated elsewhere?
Right, and that's a chilling thought.
It is a chilling thought. So I guess the question is, how do we as citizens respond to this challenge?
Well, we can't afford to be passive observers. We need to be critical consumers of information. We need to demand transparency from our leaders and hold them accountable for their actions.
That's easier said than done, though, isn't it? I mean, we're all bombarded with information overload these days.
It's true.
It's hard enough to keep up with our own lives, let alone dissect these complex political machinations, especially when they're playing out online where things move at warp speed.
It's not easy, but here's the thing. The stakes are high. This isn't just about, who wins the next election.
Right.
It's about the kind of society that we want to live in. Do we want a society where truth is constantly under assault, where facts are malleable, and where the loudest voices, often fueled by wealth and amplified by technology, drown out reasoned debate?
That's a pretty bleak picture of the future. But what can we actually do? I mean, it feels like we're up against these massive forces. Wealth technology, the whole political machinery can feel really overwhelming. Our individual actions don't really matter.
That's a sentiment I hear a lot, and it's understandable. But I firmly believe that, individual actions, when multiplied across a society, can create these really powerful ripples of change.
Okay, so where do we start?
Well, we can start by being more discerning about the information that we consume.
Okay.
Ask yourself, who's saying this, what's their agenda, and what evidence do they have to support their claims.
So basically become our own fact checkers.
Exactly. Don't just accept everything that you see online at face value.
Yeah.
And, we also need to demand more from our leaders and our institutions.
Yeah.
Hold them accountable for their promises. Challenge them when they spread misinformation or engage in divisive rhetoric. And, let's not forget the power of collective action. Support organizations that are fighting for transparency and accountability. Get involved in your local community and vote in every election, no matter how small.
Okay, so it sounds like a lot of work. But honestly, what's the alternative? Just sit back and let the world be shaped by these forces that we can't control.
That's a recipe for apathy and disengagement, which ultimately weakens the very foundation of a democratic society.
Okay.
The beauty of democracy is that it gives each of us a voice, a chance to shape our collective destiny. It's a precious gift and one that we need to guard jealously.
That is a really powerful reminder. So to wrap this all up, we've gone from this meeting at Mar-a-Lago to exploring some pretty heady stuff. The potential for a political shakeup in the UK, the role of social media in shaping political discourse, and the broader challenges facing democracies in the digital age.
It's a story that's still unfolding, and one that we need to pay close attention to.
Yeah, because it feels like the outcome of this situation in the UK could have ripple effects across the globe, impacting how we view wealth power and the future of democracy itself.
It's true.
Okay, so we've reached the end of another deep dive.
We have.
But as always, the conversation doesn't end here. We encourage you to continue exploring these issues on your own.
To think critically about the information that you're consuming, and to engage in these crucial conversations with your friends, family, and community.
Because ultimately, the future of democracy depends on all of us.
It does.
So until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and most importantly, stay informed.